Hey, Gary Breen, good morning to you.
Good morning.
What do you think of this latest news? Niall Quinn appointed at the FAI?
I think it's good. I think to have someone like Niall there who has experience scenarios like that in terms of what he did at Sunderland, in terms of being around the boardroom, decision-making process. I'm glad that someone like him is in there. I think he'll wear his heart on his sleeve. I think he'll do what is best for the FAI and for everyone associated with it, and obviously ultimately for Ireland. So I think it's a positive step.
Yeah, it definitely has been sort of roundly received in that way. Like, the difficulty is that we were discussing a bit earlier on that there is still a bit of an unknown quantity about Niall Quinn and the business side. We don't know the inner details of Niall's business acumen. Obviously, you mentioned Sunderland. We'd seen the evidence of that up close and personal from an Irish perspective about the capacity he had there to unite a town that was on its knees from a football perspective, and the impact that had on the society in general when he went in there. And you know, you used the expression, obviously, his heart in his sleeve. They're going to need, the FAI is in a dire 60 million plus debt. They're going to need more than that.
Yeah, listen, certainly, but I'm under no illusions. I don't think that Niall's going to attempt to do it on his own. I think he'll tap into people who have more experience in those areas, and that's what he is good at doing, finding people who that is their skill set. I think he'll have the ear of certain people. So I hope it goes well. Listen, I keep saying to you guys before, and I don't think that a brilliant footballer makes a brilliant manager, because it's a totally different remit. And I get your point in terms of what Niall has done in his career previously, that this is a different skill set required. But I believe that he'll surround himself with people who can make a difference.
Yeah, I think that everybody wants to see that outcome and headed in the right direction as well. So we'll watch over the next number of months and see how it all falls out. On the pitch, obviously, Liverpool getting it done again last night, Gary. This ruthless streak in them. Even when last night, like, they could have easily drawn that game, they maybe should have lost it, ground it out.
How many times have we... Yeah, Adrian, how many times have we said that this season, that the game has been at risk? And I think the opposition always feel that they're in with a chance. But the reality is that none of them have had a chance. And that just shows you just the quality of this Liverpool team, in that they're battle hardened at a time when Manchester City have become fragile. They've just really looked tough. They're seeing games out. They have that brilliance to beat you with their quality. But to be able to grind those results is something that we've always heard. It's that stereotype, isn't it, of a title-winning team. And you know, they're exactly that. I've been so impressed with them. And if you think about how good they were last year, and I think they've looked a little more vulnerable this year in terms of that high defensive line that teams were able to turn them, and they've had opportunities. It felt that the opposition have had far more opportunities against them this year than they did last season, yet they just look like the complete package. I've just been so impressed with what Klopp's done. It's been an amazing job since the moment he walked in at Liverpool. Yeah,
it's their 8th 2-1 win of the season. And like, I don't know. I was going to ask you if it's a sign, are Liverpool creaking, but it surely isn't. At that point, it's the Arsenal 1-0. There's more of a plan to it than that.
But you know, when say, for example, it's having that ability to withstand those periods when the opposition are in full flow. Now, think about that equaliser last night at Molineux. The ground was jumping. But at no point, as much as the momentum Wolves had, at no point did you think that they're literally going to go on it. You always feel, and I always feel certainly, that Liverpool can go up another gear whenever it's required. And the very fact that they've been able to play without their goalkeeper at the beginning of the season, Fabinho as well, just shows that players can come in. The one thing I will say, though, if Van Dijk is to get injured, I think it would have a massive effect. Not necessarily on this season, because I think it's pretty obvious they're going to become the Premier League champions for the first time, on top of being Champions League winners, World Cup champions as such. So everyone's saying about how far can this Liverpool squad go. The reality is that the ceiling has probably been reached, because you can't win any more than they've won. I think the challenge for them now is sustaining it over a period of 2-3 seasons and going down and matching the iconic teams of the Premier League. But in isolation, in terms of the performances this season and the potential points total that they're going to get, they could be argued as the best Premier League team we've seen.
Yeah, it's absolutely outrageous, Gary. It's interesting, like, if you take Van Dijk out of the team, if you take anybody's best player out of the team, it's going to make a huge impact, especially if it's a centre-back. At the same time...
Yeah, look at Laporte City, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you wouldn't even class Laporte as Manchester City's most important player, whereas Van Dijk, probably, you can make an argument that he is for Liverpool. Like, at the same time, though, you can kind of think about some of the discourse around someone like Joel Matip in 2019, very impressive. I know a lot of Liverpool fans were very impressed with his performances. And now it seems that Joe Gomez is is coming back to his best as well, that I do wonder if we sometimes cautiously don't give the remaining centre-backs at Liverpool the credit they deserve sometimes, because it's easy to say that Van Dijk makes them look good. Perhaps they just are really bloody good themselves.
I think they're good players, but I think if you were to play them without Van Dijk alongside him, I don't think they hit those type of levels. I think he gives you that type of confidence. Of course, you can't be as good as Liverpool are with just one defender. All of that defensive unit has to play a role, and that holding midfielder, they all play a role. But he is the player that makes them all better, who elevates the rest of their games. I think I've never really experienced that, only with probably Roy Keane, in terms of the Irish team, in terms of making everyone that little bit better because of his standards. Not because he's barking out orders, just his level of performance and the security that you have with his quality in and around you. I genuinely do believe that Laporte is City's best player in terms of his most important, because it's been proved. Look how brilliant they have still been offensively this season. De Bruyne has been sensational. Sterling's looking like such a top player in terms of having that finished product at the end. And all the other players, there's so many to mention. But as soon as you take out a resolute defender who's able to repel attacks, it causes all sorts of problems. That offensive unit of Manchester City is so good on the press, the high press. I don't think Guardiola gets enough credit for that. But as soon as you get out past that, it's been proved all season, you're at that Manchester City defence and they can't keep you out. Flip side of that is, anytime the opposition look to break, look how effortlessly Van Dijk just comes over and puts the ball back into Liverpool's possession. They start another attack. Gomez, I think it's probably the reason why Klopp has decided to go with such a high line, because of his recovery pace. But I think he struggled at the beginning of the season, took him a bit of time, and that can happen. Matip, I think, has been a brilliant signing on a free transfer, really has, and always looks composed when I see him play. But you take Van Dijk out of that and put Matip, Gomez, whatever combination, Lovren at the back, Liverpool don't look as good.
Yeah, the inevitability of it all at this stage of the year is absolutely mad. It's going to allow us, though, the beauty of it is, Gary, it's going to allow us to have a lot of other hypothetical conversations over the next while, just to fill the airtime, including, you've touched on it, and maybe you've given your answer already to this, but the Liverpool, the player of the year is going to come from Liverpool, obviously. There's 3 or 4, maybe 5 names, players at this stage. If we were to stop the season now, who is that for you?
I think in terms of, probably those Liverpool players. I've been so impressed with so many, of course we have, in terms of what they've achieved. Obviously, I've always talked so glowingly about Van Dijk, but you can't ignore Mane. We're hearing Liverpool fans saying it's the best left winger they've had since John Barnes, and his ability to continuously play games. I know he's potentially got injured last night, but if you talk about the schedule that he's had over the last couple of seasons, it's incredible. And his level performances as well. I think he's probably the main man in that offensive unit ahead of Salah now. I know Firmino plays such a key role that so many of those Liverpool players struggle to replicate. But it literally is, you could pick so many of them, but
would you give Henderson a shake of it, Gary?
Oh, yeah.
Is that just based on him playing so far above himself, or actually is it a credible discussion?
Oh, without a doubt, it's a credible discussion, to the extent now that you're going to have to put him in the same category as Steven Gerrard, Graham Souness, as iconic Liverpool captains. I mean, he's going to lift trophies that Gerrard never lifted and stuff like that. And what's been impressive about Henderson is that it was such a difficult path, wasn't it, at Liverpool, essentially replacing Gerrard. But even in isolation, the very fact that Brendan Rodgers was talking about maybe moving him on, initially going to Fulham or something like that, but he said no, he refused to accept that. Got his head down, and such a pivotal player. And I would argue as well, when he plays in that advanced position in midfield and plays to that right-hand side, these deliveries and his contribution have been brilliant. But I would argue more than that is that if he plays holding midfield role instead of Fabinho, I think he's actually a bit better in terms of his mobility. I don't think no one skips past him in a way that N'Golo Kanté skipped past Fabinho for that Chelsea goal. So exactly, I think there is an argument, and I think you probably add to the fact that he's the captain, he's the leader, and how his stock has risen so strongly over the last couple of seasons.
Yeah. You mentioned Roy Keane a bit earlier on. No football conversation is complete without mentioning his name, obviously. He lit it up at the weekend, himself and Jamie Carragher, this conversation about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and sort of how long he should be given. And he's on one of the worst runs of all time of any Manchester United manager. Do you give him time at this stage, or are things so dire you got to make changes?
Listen, I'll never call, and I never have done, call for any manager to be sacked as such, but I think the question you've got to ask is if you want to give a manager time, do you feel like you're on the right pathway? And if you do, then continue. I know people have quite often said, well, listen, Ferguson needed time to get it right. You know, he had to win that FA Cup game, Mark Robinson's goal, that famous goal, essentially. But the reality is he was a serial winner. He broke the old firm monopoly in Scotland with Aberdeen. He won in Europe with Aberdeen. He had a proven track record. Solskjaer has none of that going into Manchester United and being their manager. Now, if anyone wants to put an argument forward in terms of the fors and against, put it forward on Solskjaer and don't mention his playing career. Don't mention that and just focus on his managerial career. Now, people will say straight away, he done very well at Mulder. Yes, he did. And that gets you the opportunity to get a Premier League job. It gets you the Cardiff job. It doesn't get you the Manchester United job. And then if you then fail at Cardiff, how do you then get the Manchester United job? It doesn't make any sense to me. I think he's been fortunate. I thought he'd done a brilliant job in terms of reconnecting the club. But I do think that they made the decision far too early. And I'm looking at it now and I don't see or believe that this is going to get any better, and it's certainly not going to get Manchester United back to where they believe they belong.
Yeah,
there's an amazing opportunity for any manager to come in till the end of the season, though, Gary, given how crap everybody is around them and given the opportunity there for a top 4 place.
Well, listen, the opportunity for a top 4 place is certainly there in terms of the struggles that Arsenal have, the inconsistency of Chelsea, and obviously Mourinho's not really got his stamp on Tottenham just yet. But I don't know. I wouldn't advocate. I think it would be foolhardy for Manchester United to make the decision now. I think they should just do it in the summer. I think they'll obviously be. They wouldn't be doing their job properly behind the scenes if they weren't making contact with other managers. People might say that's a little bit sly, but that's just with the business world. You have to have plans in place. But I just look at the scenario, and I just don't. I don't see a Manchester United team that can play any other way other than counter-attack. And if you don't play and are not allowed to play, it's probably why they get the good results against the big teams, because the big teams are expansive, want to open up the game a bit, so they're able to counter-attack. The lesser teams put a defensive block on, United can't play through it. And now you take out their main asset in Rashford, I think it's going to be a tough time for Manchester United.
Who is going to win the slow bike race, in your view, and grab 4th position?
You just don't know. And at one stage, I thought Chelsea were doing very well, but they just keep shooting themselves in the foot. Arsenal, I don't believe, will be in and around it. I think Arteta initially goes in, as you all know, Owen, does a good job. It looks like he's amending certain scenarios. Certainly that performance against Manchester United got his team playing to their strengths as opposed to their weaknesses. But the problem is that those weaknesses will come to the surface again, and it's been proved it. If you continue to go back to Mustafi, if you continually go back to Xhaka, you will get the same results we've had over the last 3 or 4 seasons. They're not going to change. They're not at the level required to play for Arsenal. And the problem is that Arteta wants Xhaka to play in midfield, and I can understand why. He's a central midfielder who can play on the half turn, who can receive balls and then play, and more importantly, he can break lines with his passes. Now, if you have a midfielder who can do that, then you can get Ozil into the game. If you play Guendouzi and Torreira ahead of Xhaka, you've got centre midfielders who can't get Ozil on the ball, and if you can't get Ozil on the ball, you might as well be down to 10 pen.
Yeah, it's very true. 10 points off 4th place at the moment. I personally think Spurs are still in with a great shout of getting the top 4. The conversation around Tottenham this week, though, has obviously had an Irish tint, with Jose Mourinho's comments on Troy Parrott saying he's nowhere near the level to play first team footballer, to start and lead the line, I should say, for Spurs right now, which I guess he's kind of right in one way, given his age and the kind of unfair comparisons you can make between players of his age and other players of his age, given their position and given the fact that you're not replacing Harry Kane when you're generally coming in to start in the Premier League at 17 or 18 years of age.
And of course, if you think about all those successful Jose Mourinho teams, it's a physical presence at the centre forward, be it Drogba, Costa, those type of guys, Lukaku. I think Troy Parrott, and I've said it to you guys in pre-season, saw a lot of him, and I thought I was so impressed with his physicality as a 17-year-old. The way he was able to bump Smalling all over the place when they played against United. He was able to muscle into Milan. But to do it consistently in the Premier League at his age is a massive ask. And I don't think many players could. Certainly Harry Kane couldn't do it at that age. So it does make sense what he's saying. It'd be great that he would be able to build up his minutes and get games, but perhaps he may well have to play somewhere and learn his trade. But there's no doubt his talent. And I think Mourinho has identified that he's a special young player, but not quite ready.
Great stuff, Gary. Enjoy the weekend. Thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Gary Breen on the line there, ahead of the weekend's Premier League and plenty of other things as well. Brian has been in touch. Brian Lavin says when City beat Watford 8-0 early in the season, Klopp said he'd prefer 8-1-0s then an 8-0, he actually meant 2 1s.
He's right. Yeah, it's certainly something that Klopp is subscribing to, and it's just you couldn't. It seems like you can't control this. How do you manage to win all these games in that manner? It's just
there's not. The 1-0 is obviously a very controlled thing. The 2-1,
that's what I mean,
the 2-1 where you've been 1-1. There's a bit more panic about that than there is control.